Good morning, evening, or afternoon, whichever one's going on for you at this current point in time. Today, we're talking about vehicle inspections, and specifically, we're going to be doing an inspection for the winter season. It's about 5 days away from Christmas, so I've compiled a little checklist here. I say little, it's, a page and a half of stuff that needs to be taken care of. Whether you have an indoor garage or you park in the street, park in a driveway, parking unit, wherever you park, your car's still going to be at some point exposed to the elements, and we need to make sure everything is on the up and up. That being said, let's get right into it. So we're going to look for any damage in the sidewall, very important. You're going to look at the tread. This one's at about 35% left, about that, getting super low. Now these are about 3 years old. These are some Milestars. These are all season. I recommend going with all seasons rather than having to switch between regular tires and winter tires. Some people say patch holes. Other people say you should replace the tire completely. I say replace. The best way to find a leak is to take some soapy water. Make sure there's more soap than water, and you're going to put it in a spray bottle. Spray it down liberally, just give it a generous coat, and if you see any type of expanding bubbles, you know you found a leak. Some people say patch it, and those old people that are like, I've had my patch for 10 years and I'm still driving them tires. Congratulations, they might drive once a year in the middle of Tennessee. This is a Toyota Sienna that has cracks out the wazoo. There's complete balding on all sides of the tire. It's cracked, it's scraped, it's ready for the junk, and people keep driving on this, and we wonder why there's so many accidents. Next, if you're looking for the PSI or whatever pressure your tires are supposed to be at, inside your driver door on the right panel, there should be a sticker that will tell you the front, rear, and spare pressures, respectively. This is your go-to, and if it's not here, it could also be under the hood. If for whatever reason any of the information you're looking for maintaining your vehicle in general is not in your stickers because they're damaged or burned or just picked off, then you can talk to your local dealership or look them up online, or they might be in your owner manual if your car came with one. Now, regardless of what you use, whether you're using manual or a digital tire pressure gauge, I like using the Astro AI one that I have because it measures in the different types of units regardless of what you use. I use PSI, but it also does bar, kPa, and kilograms per square centimeter. So whatever you use, it'll do it. I also like that it has a light at the tip and a backlight, so if you happen to be doing this at night, there is absolutely no issue with visibility. Once we have our PSI reading, we can make adjustments accordingly. What I like about the gauge that I have is that even if you remove it from the tire, the reading will stay on the screen for a little while just to make sure you didn't miss it, and that backlight stays on as well. Very nice. Now, once we have our adjustment, we can add or subtract there the way we need to. But remember, if it's sitting there in the snow for 2 or 3 days, it's going to lose a few PSI. So I like to give it 2 or 3 extra PSI. This is your time to be looking at your wipers. Make sure they're not frayed, broken, or hanging on by a thread. And please do not forget that if your vehicle has a rear one, yes, check that one out too. There's usually a guiding dot to let you know if your wiper is out of alignment on the rear. So if it is, you need to just find it, reset it, and then check out whatever bolt or fastener is going to be holding that arm in, and then adjust it accordingly. Next, we're going to take a look at the weather stripping and insulation around your car. If there are any cracks like this, you're going to check around every single door and around your trunk. Or if you have a hatchback, check the rear gate. Make sure there are no bits of moisture that can get in, because that can eventually freeze or cause issues with opening and closing doors, especially on colder days. So as you can see on the rear gate, there's actually some water around the actual locking mechanism. But as you keep looking through, for the majority, this is going to happen with 14, 15, 16, 20-year-old cars. It happens. So if it's a really bad problem, just rip it out and have the insulation redone. And also, while you're back there checking out your trunk, make sure any wires or insulation or sheaths or housings for electrical wires are not chewed through by animals or damaged through time, because if any moisture gets into them, you will have a corrosion issue and potentially some voltage abnormalities. And please, for those of you who have sunroofs, don't forget them. Now, there's way too much going on under the engine, so really quick, you have to check all your fluids. That means your coolant. That means checking the reservoir, making sure that you are topped off, up to level, and making sure there's no contaminants, there's nothing floating, no dead bugs, nothing like that. Same thing with your brake fluid, with your windshield wiper fluid, and with your power steering fluid. Again, all the vehicles around me, I can't really show power steering fluid because they're all electronic, but your power steering fluid is just as essential as any other fluid. That includes your transmission and your oil. Check those. Make sure those are up to date. Make sure all your oil changes are maintenance as necessary. But the main thing is that there's no contaminants in them, and that if they need to be flushed, do that. And the last fluid we're talking about is your gas, your fuel, your energy. Check that inlet and make sure that if there's any dirt, any buildup on it, you clean that stuff off. Make sure the cap is clean, and that inner seal should be in one piece. If it's all beat up, make sure you replace it, because you could get an evap or a vacuum leak, and you might think it's something more serious when it's as simple as a gas cap. Also, when you're driving around in the winter, make sure you're not with an empty car, because if you get stuck somewhere, it's going to be a big issue getting fuel to you in some places. Now, you want to make sure your car is not home to any animals. As you can see here, there's some droppings and a little bit of food. Something is clearly under here chilling. So you want to make sure you clean out all your debris, as well as looking for any insulation issues. All these wires are typically soy-based with insulation, so they're typically very prone to being chewed on by animals. You're also going to check that air filter and make sure that it's clean. When I opened it up, I found that there was a lot of buildup there, and so 2 hours later, it was nice and clean. Assuming you've checked your wires and everything's looking good, next thing is your spark plug. Assuming the ignition coils are fine, nothing's blown out, the fuses are not broken, your spark plug you should have some kind of gauge. I don't care if it's the coin style like this. They also have the stick, or like the rod style one where you would just slide it down the rod. Once you put that gap gauge into your spark plug, it should come down to where it's into spec for your car. Everybody's is a little bit different. Some are 0.40, some are 0.44. Everybody's a little bit off by, a thousandth of an inch. Now, assuming your wires, your distributor, your ignition coils, your spark plugs, everything else is okay, the main three components of your electrical system are your battery, your starter, and your alternator. Otherwise, your battery source, your power source, your ability to start, and your ability to recharge your system. That can all be done, and I did it, but I really just want to point out the corrosion that's built on this. Apparently the owner, this is a 2018 Nissan Rogue, and she said she recently changed the battery on her car, and I was like, oh, they ripped you off. This thing has corrosion on it. I took the safety sleeve off and the safety hook that holds everything in, and this thing was scratched up, beat up, thrown around. So be careful when you're out there buying batteries, because you never know who's just going to throw anything in your car, and especially if you're not the type to check. Please check. If they tell you they're going to do 7 things, please make sure there are 7 things that were done. Otherwise, they're walking away with it. And then those people are what give mechanics and people that are honest workers like the worst impression. For the sake of this video, I'm going to be using my Foxwell BT705 battery tester or analyzer, and there's no information on this battery whatsoever as far as the cold cranking amps or any other information. So I'm going to be using 550 as the CCA, or cold cranking amps. So we're going to attach negative to negative, positive to positive. We're starting off with 12.44 volts, which is very normal for a 12 volt system. Now again, 12 volt for normal, 24 volts usually for 2 battery systems. It's a regular, not a start and stop. You're going to put all the information based off of your vehicle, test whether or not you're going to be testing the battery inside or outside of the vehicle, whether or not it's a top side or a side post. Regular, AGM or gel, pick the type of battery that you have, and the CCA is the first choice. That is the cold cranking amps, and all the other types of battery standards that it does in fact test, but we care mostly about cold cranking amps, especially in the winter. So go back up, select the one that you're going to be testing, and then set your rating based off of the specs that are on your battery. On the top of your battery, or in the front, or on the side somewhere, there will be all the information for what the performance of your battery should be. Set it accordingly, and you can proceed. Now, I just set it to 550 because that's what the other Rogue uses for its battery. Again, I don't really care about the rating of this battery because I know it's junk. I'm just looking at the battery status to let the owner know how soon this thing needs to be replaced. Now, long story short, I went through all the procedures, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And yeah, just as I suspected, this thing did not do very well. Now, in the first screen you actually saw, it said replace battery. At this point, I doubt she's going to, so I'm not even going to bother cleaning it. What I am going to do is put some dielectric grease on it just to maintain any moisture and frost that might build up as the winter goes on. Now, as far as the charging system, there's no problems there. 14.35 under load, 13.7 to anything under 15 is perfectly normal. As far as the starter, no problem. 1 second to start up. Very nice. Now, as you can see, SOH is state of health and SOC is state of charge. Apologies for that glare in the corner. But once your battery starts getting to 60% or even 50%, as you can see here, of its overall capacity with its state of health, it's time to be replaced. State of charge is essentially how well it can discharge and hold its charge. And both of those things, once they start approaching the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, just like your grades in school, anything in the 50s, 60s, it's something that's not very satisfactory to a lot of teachers. And it shouldn't be something you depend on, especially in the winter. Some people will wait until their batteries get to like 40, 30%. At that point, that's when you're going to be basically needing a jump starter in the car at all times. But I'm going to digress, and we'll get straight to the dielectric greasing so we can send this car on its way. Also, just in case you care, this thing scored 335 CCAs. This is not even good for a hybrid. A hybrid's typically about 350 to 370 for cold cranking amps because it starts off with its electric motor first. But this thing, it gotta go. It's done. Now, yes, to be clear, I did clean a lot of this corrosion off, but I didn't film it. The only thing I did film was taking this silicone grease. And again, you can use technician grade. You can use whatever's more affordable. I like the synthetic blend. And you want to make sure that you have a tight connection. All your screws, your bolts, everything around your battery are nice and tight. All the grounds are grounded. And this is meant to be a nice little coat that will keep the moisture and the frost away from your circuit. Now, this goes for any exposed copper, so make sure any wires, any connectors, any terminals are given a little bit. Now, remember, this does not, it's called dielectric grease. That does not boost the electrical capacity or potential of these connections. It is just to insulate the connections so that it's nice and safe away from, environmental challenges. Long story short, it keeps the yucky stuff out. Also, please, if you have to take off your terminal to clean it and whatever, do not put dielectric grease on the post of the battery and then put your connection down over the dielectric grease. This thing is an insulator, so it's going to be a small barrier between the two metal pieces. You want metal to metal connection and then an insulation over it to keep it safe. So make sure you have a tight connection with your terminal and then apply this grease.
So with the front of the vehicle being this way, right, toward my finger, hello. First thing we're going to look at is our transmission pan. You're going to make sure all the bolts going around are torqued down to spec. It will be either in your owner manual or you can look them up online. Same thing with your drain plug especially. Now in the case of this one, it's 25 to 29 foot-pounds for a 2009 Rogue. Newer Rogues may be a little different, but everything is going to be the same. You're going to look for any signs of leaking around the pan.
All right, he's taking too long. Basically, all you want to do is make sure it's not leaking around. If it is, you may need a gasket. Replace it. No more leaks. Make sure everything is torqued down to spec. And make sure, above all else, that you are regularly maintaining your transmission fluid. Even though some companies say, oh, don't do it, just drive it the way it is forever. That's lies. 100,000 miles, no. You should be changing your transmission fluid every 30,000 miles. And realistically speaking, you should also be bringing down that pan and replacing your filter and your gasket accordingly. You do that, your transmission just might last forever depending on how hard you drive your car. As for your oil pan, same thing. Make sure there's no leaks. You might have to change the gasket if necessary. Torque everything down to spec. But again, these things are looking so old and surface rusted. I'm pretty sure that if I even look at them the wrong way, they're going to snap off. So I'm going to leave well enough alone and we're going to move on. Just make sure that your drain plug is also torqued down to spec. Recently, she complained to me that there was a leak with her oil from the bottom. I checked and it was that her old oil plug was just leaking. I replaced this recently and it hasn't leaked since. Make sure you have the torque specs in your book or online, or you can talk to a professional. Now, while you're under your vehicle, you want to check your suspension parts. That's the biggest thing that is going to be taking all the bumps, the hits, and the maneuvering while you're driving. That means your CV axle. Make sure the boot's not ripped. There's all the grease kept inside of it. Check your sway bar links. Check your sway bar itself. Check your shocks and your struts. And any accessory lines and cables. Make sure nothing's broken or frayed. Your brakes and your speed sensors or anything of the sort. Now, with the outer tie rods and inner tie rods, you want to make sure everything's solid. I don't know who put a hex nut or a lug up on that stud. That should be a castle nut with a cotter pin, but the boot's intact. It is what it is. There's some surface rust going, but some people say this should not have any play. If you look really close, there's a bit of torsion and you can slightly see it moving, and especially after how hard they wrenched on it with an alignment, this is perfectly fine, but you do want to check on the other side and make sure they're symmetrical, and there should be no play from the knuckle. There's a little bit of torsion, that's okay, but there should be absolutely no up and down moving. Now on the other side, you can see that the castle nut is in place. There's a cotter pin going through it, and there's even a grease fitting on this one. This one's a Moog. Now, the boot is crushed for whatever reason, and it's not going to fill with grease, unfortunately, so this would be considered a bad boot. If you see something like this, it should be changed. While you're under here, take some time to check out your brake lines. Moving back, they should not be any issues as far as holes or dripping brake fluid. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a good shot, but this is essentially what your caliper should look like for your brake. Now, your pads should be looked at. Their thickness should be 50% or more. Anything below that, you would consider starting to go for some new pads. Don't wait until they're scratching metal to then start replacing. You want to make sure that the lubricant inside your piston is okay, so take the bolt out. If your sliding pin is all dry, then you need to re-grease it. If it's seized, then yikes. You may have to take it to a shop and have them hit it with a blowtorch unless you have one. But once everything is repaired, if there's any issues with the piston, the caliper itself would have to be replaced. Otherwise, it could just need a brake bleeding. If for whatever reason you feel like your brakes are too squishy or too hard, there could just be an issue with the hydraulic pressure. And also take a look at your rotor and make sure there's no cracks, no splits, or no deep spots where there's going to be inconsistent braking. Also, you'll be able to notice whether or not there's an issue because sometimes you'll see that the pad on one side is very worn out while the other side is almost new. In that case, you know your caliper is not engaging evenly the way it should. Now, a really important step is to appreciate how handsome I am, so we can wrap this up with a full system scan. Follow me. Now, if you're going to be self-reliant, you need an OBD scanner. I have the OBD2 Blue driver, and it's Bluetooth. You can have a wired one. You can get one that costs $30. You can get one that costs $1 million. It really doesn't matter. At this point, you just want to make sure it gives you enough data for you to find what's the problem, give it some power, and then do a full system scan by following the prompts on your phone. I like Blue Driver because it is completely free to have the app and you don't need an account to be able to use it. And you're going to tap read codes in the top left. If you're trying to go for a specific, more common code, you can, but I like to do all system modules, get as much information as possible, and then approach the problem from there. Now, get ready to wait a few minutes because it's going to take a little bit to go through all the information. Now, once you get your readout, your pending codes are things that the computer is still looking for information before it can confirm that there is a code. A permanent code is an actual issue your car is dealing with now, and BCM codes or body control module codes are codes that are connected to the BCM. In this particular case, it's talking about the TPMS sensors or the tire pressure sensors. 14 years, 15 years later, these things probably have dead batteries in them. Interestingly enough, only 2 of them are having issues. One is abnormal voltage, which I'm pretty sure is abnormally low because, of course, it's gonna die. And the other one's not getting any signal because it's probably dead already. There are a million things you can keep in your car, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say. And you should have a few of these in your car at all times. You should have a first aid kit. You should have reflective cones or a road flare, something to let people know that you're working on the side of the road, especially in badly lit places or in a storm or at night. You need to have people knowing where you are. And you should be checking your jack and your lug remover to make sure that if you need to change your tire, you're not dealing with broken tools or a broken hydraulic that's going to leave you sitting there waiting for a tow truck anyways. And that about does it. I've been checking my YouTube analytics and people kind of click away after a few minutes. The attention span of people nowadays is crazy. So I'm trying to make this as concise as possible. Have this list. If there's anything I missed, let me know. This is what you should be looking for. So until next time, work smart and Merry Christmas.